afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar from the New Jersey Historical Commission titled Raising Awareness of the Public Value of History. We're going to talk this afternoon about just a central topic for history that doesn't always get the attention that it really desperately needs. We do amazing things as history organizations and projects, but we don't always do as an amazing job of telling people about history and its value and its centrality, really, to our lives in a democratic society and just in communities and neighborhoods. So we're going to talk about that today, and we have two fabulous guests who are going to really give us a wealth of information and tools to go and spread that word about what we do as history practitioners more widely and more successfully. So I want to start and add my thanks to two hardworking members of the New Jersey Historical Commission staff who have put today's program together. I want to acknowledge first and foremost Nicole Primiani, who has really been the mastermind behind this afternoon's program. Thank you, Nicole, for doing, as usual, a terrific job. Also with us this afternoon is Rachel Timke, who is going to be our webmaster. Rachel is our communications and programs lead, and we're just very lucky to have Rachel. So thank you, Rachel, for keeping us all on track this afternoon. So to get us started, we want to ask all of you a couple of questions. And be prepared. We're actually going to continue to ask you to participate in today's program by answering some questions and sharing some of your thoughts about the issues that we're going to address this afternoon. But to get started, we're going to post a couple of questions in the chat for you, and we'd love to hear your responses. So first, we are asking you, what are the challenges you experience to participating in advocacy? So what are the challenges you all face? What are those barriers that you identify that make it hard to engage in advocacy? And the second question we'd like you to consider is, tell us what is the last thing you advocated for? So share your thoughts on all of that in the chat. And of course, also feel free to introduce yourselves. It's always great to see who's going to be joining us today. So next, it is my happy task to thank two of our partner organizations, the New Jersey Historic Trust and the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. We want to thank them for helping us to promote today's webinar. And we have a special thanks to our co-sponsor for today's program, the League of Historical Societies of New Jersey. And on behalf of the League, I'm delighted that Kristen Pietnochka can be with us this afternoon. Kristen is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the League. And Kristen, we'd love to have a few words of welcome from you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It is my honor and privilege to represent the League today, and I am so happy that there are so many League members and League friends in the audience today. We are really proud to have these esteemed guests with us here in the New Jersey history field, and I would hope that you all reach out after today to talk about ways in which we could move to action and implement the tips and strategies we're going to be learning from Ember and John. The League is all about community and network and building a sense of promotion and awareness for the important work we do, like Sarah had mentioned. So do please reach out and let's talk about ways we could connect. I'll put my email in the chat as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kristen. And again, it's just terrific to partner with the League on today's program and on other initiatives as well. So now let me turn the next portion of today's webinar over to Nicole Primiani. Nicole, would you please introduce our first speaker?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everybody. I want to start by giving you a couple of statistics and then do the introduction for Ember. In 2023, the New Jersey Historical Commission invested $2.9 million in its GOS program. The support leveraged $31 million in organizational income and over $25 million in total spending, while supporting nearly 700 jobs and attracting 8 million visitors. I'd like to acknowledge our Chief Grants Officer, Sean Crisafulli, for gathering this information. The Commission takes all of this information from grantee reports, and we share it to demonstrate the impact of the state's investment in history. So these are very impressive numbers, and it's all from information you've given us. It demonstrates that for less than a $3 million public investment, look at all of the wonderful things that happen. The Commission's in the privileged position to support your work and to see all of the good things that happen because of your work. So how do we take all of this information and collectively communicate it a little bit more effectively to the public and to our decision makers? And today our program is going to focus on just that question. So I'm so pleased to introduce our first speaker, Amber Farber. Advocacy has always been a personal and professional passion for Ms. Farber, who is currently a federal contractor, but up until a few weeks ago, she served as the Director of Advocacy for the American Alliance of Museums for 20 years. In that role, she worked with the Alliance's Advocate Network and the field, providing vital communications about timely advocacy opportunities. Ms. Farber's extensive experience ranges from database and activist management to full mobilization campaigns, grassroots advocacy, advocacy events, online and in-person advocacy training, digital advocacy and communications, government relations, and website and multi-channel social media management. The Commission is very pleased to welcome Amber Farber.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I am humbled by that warm and lovely introduction. And I just want to acknowledge now, because I think we'll be coming back to questions and addressing some of what folks shared in the chat at certain junctures, question and answer and conversation junctures throughout the program. But I am seeing some good responses to the initial questions come back in chat. So I just want to acknowledge that we're seeing those, and we will work on working those in. And I just, again, thank you so much, Nicole and Sarah and the Commission and all of its partners for including me in today's program. As Nicole mentioned, I have recently made a previously unforeseen transition, but of course, museum and cultural advocacy is very near and dear to my heart and had been my life's work for the previous 20 years. And that includes the honor of getting to work with partners like John Dichtel and the American Association for State and Local History over that time. So, as we all know, hopefully, and we at AAM knew deeply, it's a field-wide team effort, and we were always very grateful and admired the partnerships and work that our partner organizations across the field did as well. So I'm excited to get to be here today with you to share more about what our roles in advocacy are and the work that AAM historically has done on the year-round advocacy front, and all of the resources that organizations like AAM make available to help you fulfill that charge, which I see this as part of that. All of us, anyone working in and for and with the cultural sector who cares about it being a thriving sector, whatever your role in the sector is, it's all of our jobs to be advocates for museums. So that's a lot of what my program and information is set to share. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll that's the starting point. And then, of course, as we've mentioned, we've saved a good amount of time for questions and answers and conversation. So we'll look forward to that. And to that end, I don't plan to read to you everything that's on every slide. This is more a snapshot of how AAM approaches the advocacy work and has historically, and the resources available, just so you get an idea of what's available. And I know that Nicole and the team will be sharing resources after. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and get that part started. So as I said, my goal here today is to be sharing, resources for effective advocacy, not just taking advocacy actions, but I like us to always be thinking and approaching it in terms of what makes for effective advocacy. and somewhat through the lens of how, of course, we approached that work during my time at AAM. And then, of course, I will come back and pick up questions and conversations. So just, I never like to assume where anyone is at in terms of their advocacy level or their awareness of the different organizations in the field doing this work. So I always like to start by quickly mentioning all the ways that the American Alliance of Museums is advocating for museums day in, day out, which includes things like monitoring legislative and policy proposals, maintaining relationships with elected officials and federal agencies and congressional offices directly, ensuring that museums are at the table in key coalitions throughout the year, such as larger nonprofit education and related coalitions, and making sure that history and museums and arts and culture are always front and center in the larger community as well, making the case on Capitol Hill and working directly with Congress, and of course, empowering and mobilizing advocates, that's you all, to take action at the right times in the process and to be aware of primarily from the Alliance's lens, the federal legislative process, and when are the moments that you can and should be engaging as a museum or cultural person. So historically, Alliance advocacy starts from some key premises that can be kind of powerful for us to stop and think about, keeping in mind that the vast majority of museums and cultural organizations are independent 501c3 nonprofit organizations. They're not, independently wealthy or funded organizations. That museums are vital economic engines pre-pandemic, making significant contributions to the national and local economies. And also remembering, just how deeply impacted museums and cultural organizations in a variety of different ways were by the pandemic and the lasting impacts of building, back up to full attendance and visitorship and pre-pandemic level operations. Appreciate you all responding to the poll. It's good to know. And here's just one snapshot of some of the wealth of information that the Alliance provides to help make this case for museums and cultural organizations. We like to reinforce that there are lots of ways to advocate today, and we'll talk more about this over the next few minutes. But again, just another snapshot, not assuming that everyone knows all that's available, but the American Alliance of Museums offers a huge and deep bench of barrier-free 24/7 advocacy resources, and it ranges across, timely advocacy alerts and individual policy and issue briefs, but also more evergreen information around how to be an effective advocate, day in, day out, how to get good information about getting to know your legislators, how and when to most effectively communicate with them, and also some good information, always have to say, for informational purposes only, not legal guidance of any sort, but lots of good information emphasizing and around reminding us all that independent 501c3 organizations are allowed to participate in advocacy and lobbying. Of course, there's this information that the Alliance makes available gets into some of that differentiation between advocacy and lobbying, but there's a lot of room to do the, especially the advocacy part, which is educating stakeholders and legislators at all levels of government about what you do and how you do it in your communities and what it takes to do it. And important reminder here that not only is it allowed, but it's encouraged. And we can't assume that any elected official at any level of government knows all that cultural organizations in their community do and have to offer, and also what it takes to do that work. So that's a big important piece of the story here is that if we want them to know, we have to be the ones sharing that story. And we also like to mention, that it's similar to cultivating long-term donors and other stakeholders in your community. You don't want the first time you go to a city council member or a legislator or an elected official to be either an emergency circumstances that something's been taken away or the roof has caved in and you need a new pot of money, or a big ask, right? You want to be cultivating that relationship in lots of ways, inviting them in, sharing stories about your impact in the community prior to when you might have a key and emergency or important ask. We also like to mention, right, it's not just about funding and not just about funding at kind of maybe the key cultural organizations that folks might be most aware of. So important reminder that as we approach this work, part of what makes it important to do day in, day out, and with an open mind is remembering the broad range of policy and funding issues that are at stake, right? Everything from maintaining nonprofit status to historic preservation funds, incentivizing charitable giving, keeping in mind all that we have to offer in the education ecosystem or that cultural organizations have to offer in that realm. And of course, as well as funding for the organizations that support, for the federal agencies that support the work of our organization. So if we have that understanding that it's our job to be educating elected officials about what we do and the value of what we do, what does that mean for you as a person working and thriving in the cultural sector? It means that we need to be speaking up early and often and not relying on others to do that work, and not assuming as second nature as it is to those of us who are familiar with the cultural community about, as Sarah mentioned, the amazing work being done all year round on all different, with people of all different ages and all different impacts in the community. But not assuming that legislators and elected officials know that story unless we're telling it early and often. So in my time at AAM, we operated from the premise that that advocacy is everyone's job. It's not just the director's job. It's not just the commission's job. It's not just the service organization's job. It's everyone who is working for and with the cultural community. And what we, definitely know and learned or further confirmed over the years is that when the cultural community can speak with one voice, it's powerful. So know that when you engage in these advocacy activities that we're going to talk about and speaking up for cultural organizations, you're not doing it alone. And the more we all work to join that chorus of folks speaking up for the import and value of our organizations and the work they do, the better and the more impact it has. And of course, there are events like Museums Advocacy Day, Invite Congress to Visit Your Museum, and other programs like today's program, and other events and webinars that service organizations across the state and across the field put on to help bring cultural organizations together in community to make that important case for museums. And we're curious to see how folks name their own advocacy levels in that second poll. I tend to see, I'm seeing the poll results, a lot of leaning towards self-identifying as beginner and some intermediate. My experience with this is that even folks I know to be pretty advanced advocates don't tend to see themselves as that. So just know that your constituency is your superpower here. The fact that you work in and for and with the cultural community is what makes your voice matter. So don't be intimidated or put off if you think that lobbying and advocacy is not the focus of your role in the field. You have a story to tell and you have the power of constituency and actually have a great impact on your legislators and stakeholders by the virtue of being someone who works in the field or wants to continue or future work in the field. So I said earlier I wasn't going to read slides to you, and I certainly don't intend to. I did just want to brush on and sort of make available here, mention that there is a sort of a flow and tenor to legislative meetings, and that anytime you do have a meeting with elected officials, whether that's, again, city council member, a municipal legislator or arts person, or a federal legislator, you want to do some background, do your homework, and follow some golden rules of, just approaching them like people too. I do tend to include, wherever possible, the sort of anatomy of a legislative meeting, just because there are some elements to it that I think are not supernatural. To us, it's not the way we always do our other peer-to-peer networking. So, thinking about when you do have a chance to have the ear of elected officials and their staff, who are key internal, we call them internal third-party advocates, almost as equally important as legislators themselves in terms of making our case. You want to always think about some of these elements, how you cover them in a meeting to the extent that you have the chance to. Some reminders that dealing with elected officials and their staff especially is important to keep in mind. What I used to call some golden rules. Keeping in mind that you want to keep your communications with them clear, simple, and direct. Reinforcing the idea that building rapport is more important than ever. We mentioned a little bit earlier this idea that it's really about effective advocacy at its core is really about long-term relationship building. Again, similar to cultivating donors and other supporters and stakeholders that you work with. But they are people too, and you're not, often, gonna walk in cold first having met someone, make a big ask, and get a huge new pot of money, right? That's not how this works. You want to build a long-term relationship so that they have you in mind as they're considering policy and funding decisions. Of course, flexibility remains key at all levels of government. That was true pre, during, and post-pandemic, and always plan to follow up. So if you are getting a chance to deal with your elected officials or their staff, the folks who work for and with them, make sure that you're keeping up regular communications. And if you do get a chance to have an interaction with them, don't be shy to follow up, remind them of what you talked about, and reiterate any key asks that you had. In terms of building our basic advocacy skills, always like to remind folks to have an elevator speech ready. Again, this is another area where that elevator speech can be useful for advocacy, for funding, for other community engagement, for working with the press and local funders, and that you might have different versions for those different audiences. But it can be, helpful, especially if you're getting started with kind of your year-round advocacy or wanting to delve deeper in advocating for your organization regularly, to have that elevator speech ready so that you would have versions, for example, a 30-minute, a second, 60-second, and a 2-minute version. If you run into, a local elected official at the yoga studio or the grocery store or at the state capitol, that you have your story ready to share about who you are, what work you do, your organization, and how it impacts the community. And then I want to get into a little bit more of, so the rallying cry and the sort of charge here is that advocacy is all of our jobs if you're working for and with the cultural sector, and that it's important to be participating regularly. And so in response to that kind of call to action, we always felt it was important to then be offering a lot of tools that you can use to do that effective advocacy and kind of meet different organizations and people in the field where they're at. So there's lots of different resources available on the Alliance website. If you can just get to that short link that's here on the page, you can get to all of these resources. And I know we'll be sharing some links after, but again, you can get to everything from policy issue briefs to template messages you can send to your legislators. You can do a lookup for your federal and state legislators and find some key office and staff and social media information there. There's economic and educational impact statement templates, which are just really brief, 5 or 10 pieces of information you could pull together about your organization and the impact of the work it does in the community and have that ready to share with legislators. The Alliance also makes available a wealth of national and state level information about the economic impact of museums. I will note that this data was collected a handful of years ago, but the concept of the impact that it shows that cultural organizations are having in their communities, and you'll see here I pulled, there's the New Jersey snapshot, so that's the one I pulled for today. But, aside from the data not being, say brand new, we really do find that making that point about the overall impact, having the snapshot of the impact that the cultural sector has in states and nationwide, it always catches people's breath. It always gets legislators and staff thinking. And, our sense, historically is that while it would be great to get new data as soon as the resources were available at some point in the future, this data still stands on its own to sort of tell that story of, generally speaking, the impact of the cultural sector in state and national economies. We'll also have, there's also available the updated each year and just updated this past February Museum Facts, which is another snapshot. And again, of course, the Alliance materials are somewhat geared to museums, but that definition of museums includes, museums A to Z, as we used to say. So, zoos, aquariums, historical sites, multidiscipline museums, arts museums, all kinds of cultural organizations. So, all of the resources and materials were meant to be useful and replicable at all levels of government. And I just, before we get into conversation, just, like to remind us all of a couple of key quotes that I always kept in mind doing this work. One, as Teddy Roosevelt said, don't be intimidated, even if advocacy is not your full-time job. Do what you can, where you are, with what you have. So, that's meant to say I encourage you to check out the resources that are available, and whichever most kind of speaks to where you're at and what you feel like you have the capacity for, that matters, and that's a great place to start. The other thing is I, can't have done this work for so long and not have admitted that it does get, it's a bit cyclical. It does get a bit redundant. We are having to make the same case year over year. And I, always found it motivating to remember the why there is because, if we're not speaking up for what we believe in and the work and the funds that we think matter, we can't rely on other folks to do that. So as Martin Luther King Jr. had said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And we live in a world where a lot of things matter. So your voice speaking up for the work that you are doing at a cultural or history-based organization is more valuable than you can imagine. So I think I will stop there and take a look at questions and see if certainly I can jump into questions, but also if Nicole or Sarah, if you want to add anything or highlight a specific question to start with, I'm gonna just take a quick look at chat.
Oh, yeah, I'm taking a look too.
So let's see. Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of good comments around sharing tips about how to approach it, and and this idea that not everyone has a passion for history or sees the importance of its preservation, that's, I think, as on the one hand, I don't want to disregard that can be a bit fatiguing at times. It can be a bit defeating. I think it also underscores why it's important to think about how you can use data and a powerful story to keep making the case to key stakeholders, and also think about who in your community you can involve and help make that case. Can you be pointing your visitors and folks who are passionate about what you have to offer to some of these tools so they can be contacting their legislators and share how important your organization and its work is to them as another constituent and stakeholder. Who are the folks on your board or other folks who support your organization and work with you, who might be influencers of the influencers, who, if you arm them with the right information, can help make the case to legislators. Nicole, did you want to make any specific comments, and we'll parse through questions?
Sure. Let's see. I am not seeing any other questions in the chat, but I guess one of the things maybe we could talk about briefly would be we have a lot of small organizations, as you know. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like I don't have a voice, I don't have time to do this, so many people identify as beginners, what would be your advice to just sort of getting started?
So I used to say that, understandable if that's the case. And I always used to say, I think getting informed can be an important first step. So just making sure you're signed up for news briefs and advocacy alerts and other notifications from AAM and AASLH and the relevant, ecosystem of organizations that are the service organizations statewide and federally, because, if we're doing if those folks are, I want to say our, it's still hard for me to get used to not being our. If we always saw it as part of the mission to be making that information and that those kind of entry points, right? It was part of our job to make that clear to folks in the field, knowing, right, that not everyone is a dedicated advocacy person or lobbyists. So I think that, a couple of starting points. One is the being on the list, and that will help direct you to here's resources that are available, or here's an action item for right now. Here's something that legislators are considering, at this time. And here's a pointer to the template you can use to weigh in. I also think, thinking about how you do make it a habit, even with limited time and capacity, setting yourself up so that you're going to do an advocacy action once a month and across the calendar year, so that, in January, it's getting on the list. In February, it's taking whatever current actions are posted on the service organization's websites and contacting your legislators with those. In February, it could be using one of the templates to send an introduction letter to your legislators. In March, it can be adding federal and state legislators to your mailing list, so they start to sort of innocuously become aware of the work that you are doing. So I think that working through the resources and sort of, just tapping into using each one of the resources on a, every couple of weeks or monthly or whatever basis you can fit in is one way to get started and make it a habit. And also think about how you're encouraging your board to participate. So can you make some sort of advocacy update or action item, an item on each one of your board meetings, and get your board members involved in taking those regular, not cumbersome, but regular and steady actions to be making the case for the museum. I did see too very early on, one of the responses to one of the opening chat questions was knowing the best ways to publish information to reach the broadest and most essential audience. And I think that question to me could be taken two ways. In terms of reaching your audience, in terms of your members and visitors, like as a cultural organization or a museum or a historic site, and also right then the audience of stakeholders, legislators, and whatnot, who we want to engage. And I think, broadly speaking, my experience on that front is spreading the message often, and not assuming that just because you mention once, some key stats about your museum or organization, or what the organization is doing, or that legislators are going into session for state session or going to be making budget decisions. I think, if you're in a position to be doing the broadcasting and to be managing, sharing that information, then, what we always found is it hits different folks at different moments and across different platforms. So we would try to share on our website, in newsletters, over social media, and kind of packaging it for people so that you're educating and providing a call to action at the same time. So you're telling them what's going on, why it matters, and then maybe an action they can take, whether it's contacting the legislator or learning more about who their legislators are, or just signing up to follow your newsletters. So to sort of be modeling a philosophy of advocacy and putting some of this information across all of your platforms and saying it, following some kind of marketing guidelines that some of us are aware of, right? Like you say it to people anywhere from 3 to 5 to 13 times before they actually, before a thing resonates and sticks and takes action. So I think thinking about different ways to reach your audience, multiple ways with the key information and the action items is good. And I just want to make sure we didn't miss any other key questions, or if there was anything folks were hoping to hear today that we didn't cover. I do see, and again, in terms of comments, not questions, folks sharing some of the IRS lobbying expenditure tests, which is helpful. Also, that section of the AAM advocacy resources, there is a whole suite and section of information that points out to some of those exact kind of websites and some more of them about to reinforce that sense of if you have questions or concerns, again, on an informational purpose, about if you can lobby and how much you can advocate and lobby and how much. There are, for those of us who might be in the position of doing this work full time, we are aware they don't provide exactly hard and fast rules. They provide a lot of guidelines and a lot of scenarios, but it does really reinforce that there's a lot of room to be speaking up for your organization. And the AAM resources further point out to some nonprofit, independent sector, Boulder Advocacy from Alliance for Justice, some of these broader nonprofit sources of information on that front, so you can get even more information about that.
Amber, I
Yes.
think there is going to be another Q&A at the end
Yes,
of the next presentation. So I think for now, thank you
Great.
so much, Ember. We can't thank you enough for all that you've done for us today. For now, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Nicole, could I just ask Ember to talk about one more issue I saw in the chat before
Sure.
we let her go?
Sure.
Ember, and that was, I saw Sue Schmidt was talking a little bit about how it's hard post-COVID to get people to convene in person for advocacy in-person events. And I just wondered if you could comment on that, what you're seeing. Kind of, are other places having difficulty with in-person kinds of advocacy events? What kinds of strategies seem to be the most effective right now?
So I appreciate that question very much. I think what we're seeing from at the state and federal level from practitioners, from the legislators and their staff, is they've been anxious to get back to in-person. And we had pretty strong participation at Museums Advocacy Day this year. So folks do, I think it's a high long term, it's a hybrid. Folks are excited to get back to in-person advocacy. Advocates like being together and the energy that creates. Legislators and staff like meeting and communicating with folks in person. But the other takeaway from the pandemic era is that it really taught elected officials that virtual advocacy has an important place, and that, you know, doing a Zoom meeting can really cover a lot of the same key issue information and needs and asks and information sharing that an in-person meeting can too. So it made them believers in virtual advocacy, and it made everybody sort of firsthand understand the accessibility issues there, that you might not have the funds to travel to Washington 3 times a year, but make the trip when you can. But the virtual advocacy allows you to meet with folks in the state capitol or on Capitol Hill throughout the year without those barriers of physical travel and expense.
Oh, that's great, Amber. And I know that we've got some other questions for you that maybe we'll come back to in the end. In the meantime, you can take a peek at the chat a little bit and get ready for those. Some questions about congressional funding and schedules and, you know, all that timing, those timing issues. Great, thank you, Amber. So we'll invite our other terrific speaker here to join us, and he is John Dichtel. John is the president and CEO of the American Association for State and Local History, aka AASLH, an organization dedicated to helping public history organizations and practitioners to thrive and to make the past meaningful for everyone. For 7 years, AASLH has made a priority of helping the history community to prepare for the nation's 250th anniversary. John was the executive director of the National Council on Public History from 2006 to 2015, and was deputy executive director of Organization of American Historians from 1999 to 2005. He received his MA and PhD in early American history from Indiana University and is the author of the book Frontiers of Faith, Bringing Catholicism to the West in the Early Republic. John also helped to found the History Relevance Campaign and the International Federation for Public History. So John is a perfect person to join us to talk about this topic today. In fact, John, I think the very first conversation I think I had with you in Detroit was, I think, about advocacy and kind of the topic that we're talking about today. So I'm going to turn it over to John to present some of his thoughts on the topic, and then I'll come back and he and I will have a little conversation about some pertinent questions. So John, I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Ember, for your guidance. And thank you to the Commission and the League and all of you for being here today. I will hopefully pick the right. Can you see that? Yes. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the 250th and what an incredible opportunity it is. In 2 years and 2 months from now, we'll be marking the semi-quincentennial. And museums, historical societies, and historic sites are going to be using the excitement of this once-in-a-generation event to really engage with visitors. So we have some key opportunities here. And the first, I think, is that the nation's 250th anniversary is a chance to help American society progress toward justice through an inclusive approach to history. And second, The 250th is an opportunity to strengthen our museums and cultural organizations by attracting new interest and investment. And then third, over the next few years, so up to 2026 and into 2026 and after 2026, we can remind our visitors about how this country was created, what the struggles, failures, and successes have been, and maybe to point to where we want the country to go. And I mean collectively, the American people and in our communities. I don't just mean us on the call here today. So before offering some ideas about how to get to that vision, I'd like to provide an overview of what's been happening across the country. So several years ago, Congress established the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission. And it's made up of 8 members of Congress, 16 private citizens, and several heads of major federal agencies. And the commission, in turn, created the America250 Foundation, which is its nonprofit partner. So I'll kind of use America250 and the U.S. Commission interchangeably because they're both run by the same person. Rosie Rios is the chair of the commission, and she also heads the foundation, America250. So while America250 is doing the leading, there are federal agencies like the National Archives, the Smithsonian, the National Park Service that also have their own plans underway. They've been a little bit kind of behind the scenes with them. I did hear this week that the National Park Service is about to announce its plans and its public-facing part of its plans very soon. But this America250 U.S. Commission that's leading things from the top down now has 6 national sort of tentpole or signature concepts, what they call tentpole ideas that they're going to hang a lot of stuff on. And these were just announced last month. They've already started America's Field Trip, which is an essay contest for students. America Gives is a national service program. From Sea to Shining Sea is an oral history gathering program that will roll through communities around the country. America Innovates is a sort of World's Fair in 10 cities focusing on next generation technology and business. The time capsule is actually mandated by the federal legislation that created the commission. They have to do this. And so it's going to, but they've laid out how it will work. It'll be 250 plus objects, 5 from every state and presumably territories as well. And then the 6th signature concept is Flags for All, which is the idea that at 2:50 p.m. on July 4th, 2026, everyone will, in waves across time zones across the United States and its territories, will be waving flags, and the commission plans to make those flags freely available in the same way COVID kits were made available, sent out through the Postal Service. So each of these national efforts are going to include ways for state and local organizations to participate. And we know that from the very beginning of the commission's creation, that its vision has been that the majority of the commemoration will be done at the grassroots level. So at our level, all the people on this call. So that's where the majority of the impact will be. These 6 signature programs that I just mentioned will be kind of flying above that, maybe connecting them. But how thoroughly the commission is able to integrate those 6 programs with the work that's happening in New Jersey and other states is a really big question, because there's only 2 years left to do that. And the states, as I'll talk about, have been up to their own planning. We now know that we are at 50 states. This map is about 3 or 4 weeks old. Actually, it's about a month old. The states that are in gray and red on this map were states that did not have commissions just a month ago. But now they've all filled in except for lonely Arkansas here. Still, I believe, does not have a commission. New Jersey was one of the first states in 2018 to have a commission. I think it was one of the first 3 or 4 states actually to have a commission. But the 250th has to be about all of American history, not just the events that happened in those 13 colonies, those original 13 states, the states that would come to mind when you think about the bicentennial or the 250th. The 250th is really a chance to be much more about all of America than even the bicentennial was. And so that's going to mean drawing on history that began before 1776. The people who were on the continent before the revolution happened, and also drawing on the history of all the moments since 1776, and really the values that came out of independence and the Declaration of Independence and the Revolution. So people of all ages and backgrounds in every state and territory should see themselves in this narrative. So that's one of our, something that I think many of us are attuned to. And this path to 2026 can help show us, help show audiences, not just that history matters, but that their history matters, their family matters, their immigrant history matters, their community, their neighborhood history matters. And so we really want this to be a cohesive, inclusive, connecting kind of commemoration. So here's just real briefly what some of the states are planning. Pennsylvania got an early start, like New Jersey and other states, Virginia, Vermont, Massachusetts, North Carolina. Many of those states with direct geographical connections to the Revolutionary War. And many of those states are really going to be emphasizing the revolution and the war. Georgia, which only formed a state commission a couple of months ago, is going to be, quote, using the story of the American past to explain how a republic functions and why democracy is preferable to any other form of government. So that's a laser focus right there. Utah, which is on the screen here, is emphasizing the peoples of Utah, the many diverse immigrant and ethnic and religious groups that make up that state. And they're basing this plan on a publication that the state did in 1976 for the bicentennial called The Peoples of Utah. So they're going to revisit that. And I think that's really clever, that tactic of kind of approaching the 250th as a 50th anniversary of the bicentennial. If nothing else, if you're at a loss as to what your site is going to do for the 250th, look back to what you did during the bicentennial and try and improve on that. Pick a program and revisit it and make it better and make it ready for the 21st century. Colorado is using the 250th to also mark its 150th anniversary. And of course, Colorado is the centennial state founded in 1876, so it's their 150th. Other states like New York, Washington State, Connecticut, and several others are using themes that AASLH developed that I'll get to in a minute some variation of the themes that we put together, and I'll go through those as the basis for those states. So I think there's a lot of ideas right in there of what some of these states are already doing that can help any historical society, museum, or historic site to plan for the 250th, no matter where you are. And I guess first, if for those of you who don't know, AASLH is, I should mention, is a national association for public history institutions and the staff and volunteers who make them run. And we've been focused on many things, including the 250th for the past 7 or 8 years. And we've been helping our members and others prepare for the coming of the 250th because of those opportunities that I mentioned at the beginning of really helping to move the country towards a more inclusive sense of justice, and also out of the interests of all of our organizations to really strengthen our history organizations, our cultural organizations for the next 10 to 50 years. That really should be a goal of the 250th as well. So on screen here, last spring, we printed a guide with strategies to forming a local 250th commission. And I encourage you to look at that if you're interested in doing that in your local community, if it hasn't been done before. There's the URL there. It's basically just on our website. We have a 250th page on our website, and you'll find it there. Another thing we're working on, this is a terrible rendition of it. It's not going to look anything like this. It's a programming handbook for the 250th. It'll be out in 2 to 3 weeks. It's meant to be specifically for smaller organizations, and it includes programming ideas that are hopefully lower cost, high impact, ways to collaborate, and suggestions for interpretive approaches. And it really builds on the themes in our field guide. So I'll just turn here to a second to our field guide. This is really the heart and soul of what we've been working on. So this came out a few years ago. We're trying to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and point people to it. It's free also on our website. And it has these 5 themes: unfinished revolutions, power of place, We the People, the American Experiment, and Doing History. And for example, just to give you a sense of what those are, Unfinished Revolutions is the idea that the fight for liberty, equality, and justice has a long and complex history through politics, grassroots organizing, boycotts, protests, litigation, and other ways people have continually challenged America to live up to its highest ideals. And then another one here, We the People, examines how over time the US has incorporated more and more people of different backgrounds into our society. But at the same time, throughout our history, we have excluded people and groups. And so that history is very important in how we think about where we are today and where we want to go. And as different groups have staked their claim to belonging and pressed for more pluralism and a more equitable nation, that's part of our great shared history together. So I want to stress that the 250th is a chance for people of all backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences to really engage critically with the nation's past and their state's history and local history, and to understand connections to the present. And we're going to need really healthy state and local history museums, historical societies, history agencies, and sites to do this important work and to keep doing it long into the future. And if we pause and look back at the bicentennial for a moment, we know from a national study that AASLH published back in 1984, so shortly after the bicentennial, that more than a third of all history organizations counted in the early 1980s were created during that bicentennial era, out of that really felt shared need that communities wanted to, they were proud of their history and they wanted to tell their history. So a third of the history organizations were founded in that era. And that's a huge number. And we know today that there are more than 21,000 history organizations in our country. And we don't necessarily want more history museums or historical societies, but we do want the ones that exist to be well-funded, better connected, doing advocacy in the ways that Ember described, and doing America history in ways that speak to everyone in their communities. And I also believe that as ideologically divided as the country is today, we have additional labor to do. History museums and historic sites can help bring people together across racial and ethnic divides, across cultural and political divides. There are ideas and values that we share as Americans, and emphasizing these and how they came to be and what the sacrifices and struggles were along the way and continue to be for far too many people will help. Having those conversations, having that recognition, having that awareness will help to repair our civic fabric. It will rebuild the respect for evidence and good faith argument, and it will make history institutions more central to people's lives and to their communities. And just a little bit of hope here. A year and a half ago, a survey group, More in Common, released a fascinating report, Diffusing the History Wars, Finding Common Ground and Teaching America's National Story. And it studied polarization in the national conversation over how US history should be taught to future generations. And it confirms the wisdom of a common ground approach. And by common ground approach, I mean really aiming for the vast swath of the middle. And that does not mean to neutralize things or tone things down or weaken them or water them down, but it means to try and create, present history, historical questions, historical interpretations that really invite people in with different viewpoints and have space and time for them to share those viewpoints and hopefully emerge better, more informed about other people, feeling better, feeling more strongly connected to each other, to their country, to their state. So what More in Common found is that 86% of Americans, the vast majority of both Republicans and Democrats, agree on fundamental ideas about our national history and how it should be taught. Quote, Americans of all political orientations want their children to learn a history that celebrates our strengths and also examines our failures. Americans overwhelmingly agree that experiences of minority groups are an important part of that history. So the next 2 years are for all of us a chance to prepare, think big, and think to the future. So what will the legacy of the semi-quincentennial be? What foundations can we lay far into the future? And I'll end by urging all of us to work together on seeking and developing common ground where the broadest swath of people can explore a nuanced, complete, honest history together. We have to help build from our local histories a reinvigorated national history of wholeness, one that emphasizes the ongoing struggles, setbacks, and achievements in becoming a more just society, but also emphasizes cohesiveness and holding us all together from the center. And we have to do that even if it's a history that we continue to wrestle over. So I'd like to show you this book. I hope many of you know about it already. I'm a big fan of Harvard historian Jill Lepore, beautiful writer, writes for the New Yorker. So she and others have been calling for this kind of approach to American history, what she calls a new Americanism, or quote, a clear-eyed reckoning with American history, its sorrows no less than its glories. In her book, This America, The Case for the Nation, Lepore defines, quote, this America as a community of belonging and commitment held together by the strength of our ideas and by the force of our disagreements. She continues, a nation founded on universal ideas will never stop fighting over the meaning of its past and the direction of its future. That doesn't mean the past or future is meaningless or directionless, or that anyone can afford to sit out the fight. The nation, as ever, is the fight. And this is our fight too, as history and cultural organizations. It means supporting a civic society, ultimately, that leaves room for disagreement, yet to which we all belong. And this is exactly the time to start using the 250th to make this kind of progress toward a reckoning with America's whole story in a way that uplifts your organization and your community. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. You've made me think a lot as you were speaking, as you talked about the bicentennial, about my own experiences as well. And I don't know if you saw in the poll that was flashing by as you were presenting to us, but it looks like we have more folks here this afternoon who remember the bicentennial, a few more than don't. So I thought that was interesting. And I'd like to also invite all of you who do remember the bicentennial, share with us, if you would, in the chat, kind of if you have a particular memory of the bicentennial. It would be fun to see what that is for you, because one of the things, John, I'm throwing you a curveball here, so I apologize in advance, but one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about that, again, was my own experience of the bicentennial, but also some of the differences that the society has gone through in 50 years that may make our experience of the semi-quincentennial significantly different. So I'll tell you what I mean. One of my big memories of the bicentennial were those bicentennial minutes that came on. I think it was on CBS, the network was CBS, and every night during a certain period of time leading up to July 4th, 1976, they would show one of these bicentennial minutes. And growing up in Seattle, Washington, as I was, those had a huge impact on me. I was a high school junior, I guess, at that point, and I was fascinated. I was totally fascinated. They were primarily about battles and generals and politicians, as I recall, but they were nevertheless very fascinating to me. The other thing I remember is, but let's just stick with that. Here's kind of the point I was getting to. Very different time, 1976, in terms of media. There was no social media, of course. There was no cable television. I don't even think there were VCRs and that kind of technology for making your home a home theater. So there was a lot fewer options for Americans' eyes and attention during that period, which meant a lot more of us probably saw the same things, like those bicentennial minutes. We've got such a different landscape, don't we, now, with social media and with different folks of different political persuasions going to different kinds of media outlets, et cetera. Have you reflected at all about what kind of impact that may have and how we as historians can get our message out? It's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, a lot packed into that. I have thought a little bit about it. Yeah, so certainly all these incredible digital ways to stay connected that were not even dreamed of, except for maybe a small handful of people in the 70s. And I would think that there's great opportunity there for reaching huge audiences, but we're entering a blizzard of information that and really fighting an uphill battle because there are people dedicated to grabbing others' attention with the most outlandish, salacious, violent, whatever kind of language. But I actually think that one of so there's an opportunity for the 250th for all of us, I think, is that maybe sort of a positive and negative here. One is we didn't have all these social media, internet tools to band together as historic and cultural sites and museums across, regionally in our state, within our region, across the country. We have those now, so we should all be learning it from each other and helping each other through associations like AAM, my own association, AASLH, through state associations. So positively, there's great opportunity here to stay connected. I don't know about reaching a wider audience or reaching the general public, because I think there's, as I said, there's a blizzard of information already out there. But certainly there'll be some, but maybe sort of a negative, and it's not really a negative, it's really more of a positive, but I'll cast it as a negative, is that I was thinking of the 250th as almost like a COVID moment. Like, one thing we all learned from COVID and the pandemic is how much we really love the outdoors, how much we really love going to
Right.
and national parks and state parks, how much we like being with other people, and our neighbors, going to church, community, whatever. So I think the 250th, through the events that we plan, maybe can reignite or reignite an interest in or introduce to a lot of Americans, hey, museums and historic sites are awesome, or hey, American history is really much more than what I learned in school, and it's around me all the time, and now I really feel this need to understand it. So I think all of that could come out of the 250th if we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to share, so thank you, Joseph, for sharing that your school had a traditional costume parade. Oh, I've just, hang on, let me get back to your comment. And your mother made you a period sailor costume, outfit, and you had a couple of other students had the opportunity to write a short article for the local newspaper. I love it. Thank you for that. So we could go on about the bicentennial, but let me flip back to a pressing problem that a lot of our history organizations are facing. A lot of them, the small organizations, and we do have a majority of those here this afternoon from our poll, they feel quite isolated sometimes with limited resources and many, many challenges. So can you share with us just a little bit from the research AASLH has done, what some of the trends are that you see across the field that are common issues? Maybe so our folks here in New Jersey don't feel like they're facing these alone. What are some of these common issues you see nationwide that the smaller history organizations are facing?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so ASLH has a good deal of experience with that, because we are in our members are all kinds of history organizations, but we have always, but particularly in the last 3 to 4 years, because of the approach of the 250th, started to emphasize small organizations, and that if the more we can all do collectively to help smaller organizations, it will lift all boats, including Smithsonian and national park sites. So our focus is from day to day is really on small organizations. And we did, Sarah, you're referring to, I think our census.
Mm-hmm.
We did was a census a couple of years ago. We got NEH funding. We counted all the history organizations in the country, and it hadn't been done before as thoroughly as this. And by a very conservative count, there are 21,588 history organizations in the country. And 80% of those have annual budgets under $200,000. And 90%, so including that 80%, so 90% of them have budgets under $1 million. So the vast majority of history organizations are very small. And they're all struggling for adequate resources. Many of them rely on a volunteer base. We all rely on volunteers, but many of them rely on an aging volunteer base. Like we have a generation, and this is a critical issue that I think AASLH is going to put a lot of attention into in the next year. What's going to happen when these baby boomers and the generation before the baby boomers retire and drop out, or just stop, not just retire, but stop volunteering? There may be a big yawning gap that we all have to address. History organizations also are, like we talked earlier about how most of them are nonprofits in the country, but they are all, something that's unique to history organization is a sense of public purpose, I think, in that history and public history, the work that we all do for the public, really operates in a deep and distinct hybrid kind of model that's a partnership between government and private nonprofits. And this is a strength for the field. Yeah, a lot of other fields don't necessarily, other disciplines don't necessarily have that kind of unique, close bonding intertwinedness with government and with that sense of public civic value in quite the same way. So I think that's a real strength that that a lot of small organizations have and share, and maybe don't necessarily think about.
I agree with you there. Yeah, absolutely. I think that whole public-private aspect of history is something we should continue to explore and try to understand better and better. And I have to just share one more bicentennial memory. This is just great. And I think it's Peter writes that everyone had some kind of collectible bicentennial packaging. We'll have to see if that happens again for the 250th. They slapped the bicentennial logo on everything, including his 1976 high school diploma, even on the diploma.
Wow.
So, love it. Okay. Now, John, the upcoming 250th can also seem daunting, as we've talked about these small organizations, to organizations that may already feel overburdened. And I would love it if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the strategies that you've seen small organizations, particularly taking advantage of as they think about how to program for the 250th. You know, it's really hard a lot of times, especially for small, but medium and large size museums too, to add on something. What are some of the strategies you've seen employed to kind of reduce that capacity overburden?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we get a lot. So first answer is we're producing a programming handbook that can help answer that question, and it's free, and you just have to come to our website to get it. Second answer to that question is look to the New Jersey Historical Commission, to what the State Commission is planning in New Jersey, or if you're not from New Jersey and you're on this call for some reason, look to your state commission. So there's two. A third one would be to, well, I said it earlier during my PowerPoint presentation of simply look back at the bicentennial and what your organization did or what happened in your community and revisit that and treat it as, I love this, the 50th anniversary of the bicentennial, because so many people are still alive who experience, and it's a great moment of nostalgia for them. But my number one recommendation, and not just mine, I'm getting this from other people, I just collect these, is to simply repurpose your existing or planned programs to fit the 250th. Maybe it's just putting that logo on what you were already planning to do.
Like the diploma.
Yeah, like the diploma. The diploma tactic. Yeah, so you don't have to invent something new. You can find something you're already doing that fits a statewide theme or fits one of our themes or something. So that is a big recommendation. It doesn't mean creating something brand new. Other suggestions would be to work with other sites, other organizations. So partnering with other historical organizations in your area. That's always a good plan. The Park Service, I believe, I heard I'm going to be doing a call like this in a couple of weeks with the Friends or the nonprofit Friends organizations that support the 400 and whatever it is, 440 parks around the country. They're going to be interested in partnering with local history organizations. So you might look to one of them. And then the last recommendation is to look for plug and play kind of resources. And this is, I didn't quite mean it this way, but this is a good example. I mean, I didn't mean plug and play this way, but it's a good example. So Ken Burns is doing a new documentary on the American Revolution that will be airing, I think, starting in 2015. And so simply, showing an episode of Ken Burns and then having a community discussion around it is would be a great way to be connected to the 250th.
Oh, great. Those are great ideas. And you gave me an opportunity to just remind folks that, yes, indeed, Revolution in J, it does have a host of resources for all of you here in New Jersey to take advantage of, including traveling exhibits that you can sign. It's free, going to be free. We have a host of things that you can plug into and then make your own at your own site. So we're delighted to offer those things. As usual, our time goes short, so I may save. I want to ask a crystal ball question, but maybe I'll wait till Ember joins us and we'll ask you both to look into your crystal ball as to what we'll look back on the semi-quincentennial and what it will tell us in the future. But why don't we end with this one before we invite Ember back in, John? And I know this is a hard question, but picking up on national and state level trends that you see, what are some of the key issues that history organizations are kind of coalescing around as they prepare for the 250th? Are you seeing any trends and what you see across the country?
Yeah, definitely. I guess a surprise for me, and it shouldn't have been a surprise, is how many organizations and state commissions are focusing in the last year really on civics and history. So it's not just a moment of, and I worked a lot of that into what I was talking about in my presentation. That is not something that I had seen very much of in the public history field. Civics was always considered something separate from history, but the 250th is bringing the two bring history organizations into contact with proponents of civics and teaching civics, which I think is great. And we all see the need for that as we turn on the daily news.
Yes.
So I would say that's one. I also think that kind of along with that is the idea of building more spaces for programmatic spaces and maybe physical spaces for having conversations across political and cultural divides. And I think museums were always kind of working on that. But that has become, again, because of the daily news, national news, we all see the need for more conversations like that. Inclusion, which I also talked about, I think is a huge trend. You saw that in the Utah, the peoples of Utah, our theme, We the People. I think it's part of New Jersey's themes as well. A lot of the states are really emphasizing the e pluribus unum idea, which kind of comes out of the post-World War II era of America as a melting pot, which is not a great metaphor because peoples and cultures lose their identity in the melting pot, but maybe a salad bowl.
Tapestry,
yes. And tapestry is rising quickly as a metaphor. That's a great point, Sarah, that as a trend that people are coalescing around. And then I guess the last one is just those who have been planning for the 250th for a while are also now starting to think beyond 2026 and seeing the opportunities for the kind of long-term advocacy that Ember was talking about, not just doing that for emergencies or when you have to, but having built those relationships. So learning from AAM, using their resources for how to do that and doing it year after year. And then also all of us working together as associations or as organizations and relying on each other. So building those structures to last long after the 250th is another kind of trend.
Absolutely. So why don't we invite Ember back in? And I'm going to ask Ember, I'm going to ask you to address a question that was hanging in the chat when we left you. And I know that Julie would like to know a little bit more about the budget, the congressional budget cycle. How does one master that? She's talking about the current CR that I think we're still under a CR, right? They haven't passed a new budget, so we're under some crazy and terrifying patchwork of tell us a little bit where we are and how advocacy fits into at the national level that budget cycle.
Yeah, that's a great question. I just want to thank you and John for the conversation. I think John elevates any conversation he's part of, and I always learn something getting to hear from him. So thank you for that. I feel lucky to have gotten to be part of that. And I had flagged that question too. So thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Julie. So the federal congressional appropriations process is messy as ever. And what we practitioners have gotten to saying is that, we no longer say a normal budget year because the norm is a not normal budget year. So as advocates, we kind of have to learn to roll with that flow and be right. So, okay. So theoretically, Congress would come out with budget caps and a budget for the year in the spring of a fiscal year that runs October 1st. So the next fiscal year would run that coming October 1st through the following September 30th. So that means between February and March, I'm going to try not to get to how a bill becomes law with you. Top level, there's a process by which the chambers go through, and especially the House, because funding bills start in the House. That's part of the rules. They start in the House and then get voted on by the House and then the Senate. And then if they have to come together on differences, that's how you get to the conference process. But theoretically, they would set what's relatively understood to be budget caps, and then they would start the appropriations process for the year, which, if we were going by the book, would be 12 separate appropriations bills that group major pots of funding and agencies together. Interestingly, for this group, if folks are not aware, you might want to keep in mind, for example, that Institute of Museum and Library Services and OMS funding lives in the much larger education bill. NEA and NEH funding for the endowments for the interior and the arts live in the interior funding bill. So right there's like separate, processes and committees and all of that we're keeping track of. What has happened for many out of the last several years, I stopped keeping track at some point, it was 7 out of 10 and whatever. I don't know that any of us are keeping track anymore, is that they don't finish that process on time by October 1st of a given year. And then we're in these series of, as has been referenced, these continuing resolutions. I can say they did just recently actually seal the deal complete. Everybody, House and Senate approved, and the president signed off on the final batch of CR of FY 2025 funding. The second batch, which included education, but actually I think Interior they had separated the remaining funding into 2 buckets that actually had 2 separate CR dates. Interior was one, and one, education was in the other. Both had been approved by Congress and signed by the president towards the end of March. And I'll drop in the chat the link to a recent Alliance advocacy alert that details where things landed for IMLS, at least in that process. So it is I think what I want to say here is it's important and valuable for all advocates to have some awareness of the process. It's also part of where the value of participating in and keeping up with and leaning on your service organizations can help, because they'll do some of the work of managing that process federally, or the state service organizations at the state level, and we're always sharing information with each other. I would say, I think the takeaway for me from an advocacy perspective is not to get too defeated and not not to traffic in these kind of, I think I'm trying to train myself as others are, not to traffic in idioms too much, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because the process gets messy, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be participating. And actually, I think makes it more important that we're speaking up all throughout the process. The question included a really salient point of, is it possible to add new funding during the CR process? And what I would mention there is that that's not generally part of that process. That would be more if it's, kind of much bigger than our bigger sort of emergencies or pots of money. That's where they might add in, emergency funding for something like the situations abroad, which, as we all saw, this recently actually got handled separately because it was creating a controversy and keeping the funding bills from moving forward. But so in terms of that CR situation and our role as advocates, what we're doing is speaking up for and fighting for that the whatever funding level they're considering for the funds we care about actually doesn't get cut. Because usually a lot of what's going on in the CR process is negotiation either between the parties or the House and Senate or some level House, Senate, and President as to their, some party, not political party, but there's always some parties in that process who are looking to contain funding as much as possible, right? It's not generally the place, that new funding is added, or if new funding had previously been added through House and Senate consideration, you really have to fight for it then. So the CR process is really about reminding legislators all throughout that process, which ran from October to March this year, that the funding you're following, you still care about it, that even if we want to manage our federal budget, that's not the funding to be cut, and keeping a steady drumbeat of that message going. So I tried not to be too complex, but I'm not sure I succeeded, but that's actually a snapshot into the, as they used to call it, the sausage making. So and I think, as I said, we're all sort of getting used to that being as much of the norm as the kind of how a bill becomes a law version of the process. And just before I forget, I will drop that link to that particular advocacy alert in the chat so people can see where we're at now.
Thank you. And to Peter's question, yes, this recorded webinar will be available on the Commission's YouTube channel. So we will make it available for you to go back to. And yes, Sue Schmidt, I do remember the Liberty Train. I just wanted to make sure we slipped that in there too. But I think because we're down to our last 5 minutes, I'd love to kind of get you both to tie your two presentations together by considering this question. I saw in both what AASLH and John, you talked about having a goal of strengthening history organizations as one of the big outcomes of the 250th. We here in New Jersey at Revolution NJ, that's one of our goals, is to strengthen history organizations. And by the way, when we tested that goal with people around the state, that was very popular. People wanted to see our history organizations strengthen. And the 250th is an opportunity to actually achieve that goal. I wonder if you both could just give us your aspirations or your insights into how these two things intersect, advocacy and the 250th. How would you summarize maybe top 3 tips for using the 250th as to reach that goal of strengthening our history organizations?
John, you want to go ahead first?
Top 3 tips.
However you'd like to, how can we
I've got one.
achieve that goal? Okay, good. Maybe
I'll come up with 2 more. Number 1 is just emphasizing this is a phrase we use all the time here. It's a once in a generation opportunity. Yes, many of us lived through the bicentennial last time, but we were high school students, or I was in 6th grade, I think, 5th and 6th grade. But you only get kind of one chance at these 50th anniversary things. So, but I think that can be shared, that can be turned onto or used. What's the word I'm looking for? Used as leverage with legislators and government officials and funders. We used that successfully actually with a grant that we got, a major grant that was just total blue sky. Just, hey, why don't we ask this? We never get major grants. We rarely do, but we turned to this one funder and said, they were interested in giving us a small amount of money, and we said, but this is a once in a generation opportunity. Like if you don't do it now, it's not going to matter in nearly the same way, because the 250th will amplify everything that we do. So I think that's the big tip with advocacy in the 250th, and I'll try and think of two others.
That's a great one, Ember.
So I think a couple of things, I don't part takeaway, part tips, but and it's some of what sort of came up in one of the Q&A in the Zoom-based Q&A, but I think you know, and John alluded to some of this throughout his comments today so well, but this idea that if you engage in America 250th, you are building and creating your advocacy muscle. So if that's how you have the capacity to engage right now, think of it as a starting point. Think about how you can take away, you know, you're learning learning and practicing those skills of making a case and working in coalition and raising your own visibility and getting your seat at the table among, you know, the other organizations in a state that are also marking this anniversary for so many reasons. So I think thinking of it, you know, we said in other ways about other things, not one and done. Right. So using, you know, thinking of all of those skills as how they're translatable into whatever else you want to be making sure your legislators are aware of before, during, and after this anniversary. And then also I think about the relationship building. So, you know, again, it came up in Q&A, it comes up at Advocacy Day, but this idea that again, we all have limited capacity, but that you may or may not be regularly connecting with the other organizations in your region or state or city that are fighting the same good fight and doing the good work that you're doing. And I think, you know, inherent in the 250 anniversary preparation is that kind of coalition building, right? So this idea that if you're going to be sitting around the table with this set of organizations in your state or region that's preparing for the 250th, think about how you keep that group and that coalition up for long-term advocacy.
That's great. Gold stars. You knocked it out of the park. And I wanted
quick. Oh, we're at time.
Yeah.
And it's something I already said as part of my presentation, but Ember reminded me of it. Just using the 250th as an opportunity to explore this common ground of finding ways to bring different voices together, different perspectives together. There's this false narrative in the country right now of that you either hate America or you love America, or you know, there's two kinds of history, and like it's never that way. No, very few people, only on the far fringes, fall into one of those. It's much more rich and complicated and interesting, and kind of expanding that common ground, and places where people can get together and learn together and work things out together and plan for the future together. That's what the 250th is about. And I think that resonates with political leaders, at least the ones the same.
Oh, thank you, John. Thank you, John and Ember. That was terrific. A great wrap up. And let me just add, because our poll revealed that the majority of our attendees has never participated in an advocacy day. I just want to say they're really not scary. It's actually a lot of fun, and other people who've gone have the same reaction. So I encourage you all to sign up, even if it's your first time. It is not scary, and organizations like AAM will help hold your hand and help walk you through the experience. So thank you so much. What a great program. I want to thank my colleague, Nicole Premiani, for putting all this together. I want to thank Kristen Pietnochka and the League for being our partners, and Rachel for being a great webmaster. Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Thanks.